Thank you. So now we will go to something that is a little bit less down to earth than the drones, but actually there are very many similarities between what all the drone guys of the world are doing and what we are doing, because the technology that has enabled drones to be built in the first place is actually pretty much the same core technology that we're using. And we then combine that with technology developed by NASA in the 50s and 60s to build rockets. And as Katrina said, we are a group of about 50 people, engineers, mathematicians. We have a kindergarten teacher. We have a lot of metal workers. And all of us have shared the same dream from we were little kids. I mean, most of us are around 40 or 50. We all grew up in the 70s and 80s, watching the space shuttle on television and dreaming about putting on our own spacesuit and going to space. And of course, for most of us, this was all a dream. Until in 2011, our two founders, Peter and Christian, started Copenhagen Suborbitals because they simply sat down. Originally, it was kind of an art project to build a big rocket and see if this could actually work. And all of a sudden, they realized that this could actually work. You could actually go down to the local hardware store and find almost everything you need to build a rocket that would put a man into space. This is pretty much what our astronaut will see once he or she goes into space. We are launching from a small area down here outside Bornholm, in the middle of the Baltic Sea. And you may ask, why are we doing that? Why are we just not putting the rocket on land and firing from there? Because that would be so much easier, and it would be so much easier. But the answer to that question is regulations. Because you cannot just take your 17-meter tall rocket and place it in your backyard and fire it and go 100 kilometers up to space. Well, actually you could, but you would get into a hell of trouble afterwards. Mostly because, as you know, the land and the sea is fairly well regulated with the traffic, but the air is even worse. There are planes everywhere. Have you ever seen one of those small videos where you can see all the air traffic over the America, for example? There are planes everywhere. The chance of us hitting one of them is probably not that big, but just the idea of it is horrifying. And also, our workshop is right next to about 10 kilometers from Copenhagen Airport. So that would be a pretty bad idea to do that. So we are actually sailing our launch platform out here to Bornholm because there's an old military shooting area. We have simply found a little loophole in the regulations. There's an area called ESD 139, which is an old NATO military area, and they're used to that. They're used to NATO coming in and firing their guns and testing missiles and all that. And plus, it is in international waters. So we can actually take our little boat, sail out there, and launch our rocket. We just call air traffic control in Sweden and say, at 1200 hours next Thursday, there will be a shot to unlimited height, and they say, okay, we'll redirect the traffic. So they'll actually redirect all the air traffic around the area, and then we can launch our rocket. If we had been fishing cod, or mining, or drilling for oil, we would be sued into the next century. But we can actually fire a missile with no problem. And I'll try to, before we move on, I will later talk a little bit about why it's important to do this, but to begin with, I will just, so you get the concept, try to explain our mission and what we will actually do. You can see our mobile launch platform there on the infographic, and you can see the rocket flying up. What we are doing is an suborbital mission. I don't know if you know that, but there's a huge difference between a suborbital mission and an orbital mission. A suborbital mission is pretty much the same as Alan Shepard did in the 50s, the first American in space. You fire your rocket, you fly up, and you pass the Kármán line, the 100-kilometer line, which is the official boundary to space. And then once the rocket has burned out, or once it has lost all its impulse, then it just falls back down to Earth. So if there's no wind and the weather is fine and everything goes well, it is a pretty straight ride, actually. In theory, you would come down the same place as you started. In practice, not so much. You can drift up to 100 kilometers. If you were to go into orbit around the Earth, you would have much more power and much more speed, and the descent would also be a little bit more complicated. But basically what we do is we have a big rocket with a man on top. We burn the main engine for about 50 seconds. And when the main engine cuts off in about 50 kilometers, we will reach a speed of 3.5 times the speed of sound. So he will be accelerated to Mach 3.5 in about 50 seconds. When the engine cuts off, the rocket still has enough impulse to reach just above 100 kilometers. When we do that, the capsule will be separated. The booster will just fall to Earth in the parachute, hopefully. We have had some issues with the parachutes. And the capsule will separate, tumble a little bit, and then also start to fall down to Earth. And that is actually the most difficult part of the mission, because going up there is easy. But coming down, well, that's quite easy also. But to make sure the guy inside actually survives, it's the really, really, really tricky part. Imagine this. Imagine you are sitting atop of a 18-meter tall rocket that your friends built. You are 35 kilometers out to sea, and you are sitting about 17 or 18 meters up on a launch platform in the sea that is just moving gently back and forth. Have you ever tried to sit, the concept of sitting on the one end of a long rod, for example, or going up to a high building? Even though the building is just shaking a little bit, you can feel it. You can feel the roll. Imagine that. Even though the platform is just doing like this, a half a meter from side to side, you'll be sitting up there, while all of us are struggling down to fix all the wires and stuff. And we do this in the summer because the weather is good, so the heat will be quite intense up there. So you'll be sitting in this metal can atop the rocket, shaking, and then all of a sudden the engine fires, and you will be accelerated up to 3.5 times the speed of sound. Then once the rocket is up there and the capsule releases, you will start tumbling, because there's no air resistance. The capsule wants to fall, but there's no air resistance, so it'll just tumble around and starts to fall while it's tumbling. So we need to talk about the breakfast before we go up there. Then what happens is a small device called a balloon comes out. You can see it in the drawing there. The balloon is just a little, it's just kind of a parachute, but it's not designed to break the capsule. It's designed to make it go the right way. Because this is actually the most important thing of the descent. We need the capsule to go the right way down, because all the energy that we have put into the rocket to make it fly and to carry all the weight into space, that energy has to be absorbed somewhere. And the only way you can do that when you're braking is either in a parachute or as heat because of the air resistance. So once the capsule starts falling and it hits the dense part of the atmosphere in about 80 kilometers, 60 to 80 kilometers, then it will start to heat because of the air resistance. So the capsule will be red hot glowing in the bottom, and the astronaut will see out his window all these flames just licking up the side of the capsule. We need the capsule to be able to withstand that. Then, in about 3 kilometers down, the drogue parachutes will come out just to break the capsule slightly, and that would probably feel like being kicked in the face by a horse when it breaks. And then afterwards, the main parachute comes out, and we have splashdown. And now comes the very, very, very most dangerous part of this mission, when the astronaut is down and lying in the water. Because, as I said before, he can easily go, if the winds are bad, the jet streams, he can easily be carried 100 kilometers away. So we need to sail from where we started to pick him up 100 kilometers away. And even though he has flares, and we put all this green stuff in the water so that we can find him, even if we have a helicopter to find him, finding an object 1 by 2 or 2 by 2 meters out in the ocean is actually quite difficult if you don't know precisely where it is. So this will be the most difficult part of the mission. And that's pretty much it. Usually I get a question like, but why are you doing that? Because it has no really purpose. And my answer is usually, why not? Because we can. Of course, the answer is a little bit more complex, but before we go into that, I'll just show you some details about our rocket. This is the Spiker rocket that will carry the astronaut. You can see the capsule is actually just a little can. Normally when you do this, normally in spaceflight, you will have the astronaut lying down. And if any of you are doctors or in medicine, you might know why. It's simply because of the G-forces. The worst thing you could do was to be standing up like this, because when you are accelerated upwards like this, then all the blood would just go into your legs and you would just pass out immediately. And if you are in that state for more than 10 or 15 seconds, you would probably die. The best thing is to be lying down, because then all the blood from the extremities, that's what we call the arms and legs, your extremities, will go down into your torso around the heart, so the heart will work and can still pump blood up to your head. So the next best thing is actually to be sitting like, I'll just hide down here, like this. You need to put your arms and legs as close to your body as you possibly can. So the astronaut in our little capsule here will actually be sitting like this in a cannonball position. I have a small draft here that you can see. You can see there's not much space in there. You will have a small chair, no controls really, because everything is automated. You cannot control anything when you're going at that speed. In the 60s, there was a huge discussion when they were developing the Apollo program, because all the test pilots back then, all the astronauts were old test pilots. They were flying the supersonic jets and everything, guys with huge egos. And they wanted the engineers to build them control sticks so that they could take over control of the Apollo vehicle if something went wrong. And they actually managed to persuade them to build in some steering things, but it was never really used, because you cannot do anything. You need to rely, just like the drones, you need to rely on the computers to be able to control the vehicle for you. If something goes wrong, bad luck. There's nothing really you can do. But here you can see the concept of the capsule. You have the astronaut in the middle. We have the heat shield in the back. In the bottom, we have some air tanks and other stuff. And also the bottom will be built in such a way so that it can compress just like a car. You know, when you have these compression zones in a car, so that it can take an impact. Because when we're hitting the water, the impact is actually quite hard, even though you're in a parachute. And then in the top of the rocket, we have the nose cone and some compartments for parachutes. And that is basically it. This is the philosophy that our project is built on. We want to put a man in space, and we want to do it just good enough. We don't want to build rockets like NASA, because that has already been done. They are focusing a lot on how to make things more efficient, because they need to put huge payloads into space. And I mean, this is actually why I think this is important what we are doing, because just 20 years ago, if you were to launch, for example, a satellite, a working satellite, a useful satellite, it had to be the size of a bus, because you needed reactors and batteries, and the electronics were quite bulky. But today, you can actually easily build a satellite weighing 10 kilos. And that is actually mainly because of development in smartphone technology, because the computers and gyros and everything are so small that you can build a functioning communication satellite that weighs 10 or 15 kilos. And such a satellite could actually be put into space if we replaced our capsule with a small second stage. Then we could launch a small satellite. And think about this. The rocket that we are building, the cost of the materials is about 1 million kroner. That's it. Of course, I don't take into account all the labor and all the man hours put into this, but the cost of the materials is about 1 million. And everything is designed in a way so that it can be produced easily, and thus we would be able to test a lot of them, and we will be able to make a lot of them. So imagine a world not in a not very distant future, 10, 15 years maybe, where like a company have their own private jet, they would also actually be afforded to buy their own rockets to launch their own satellites, and not having to piggyback on the Russians or Americans or all the government space agencies. I think that's very exciting. Here you can see, because I wanted to show you that this is not just all fantasy, because we have actually launched quite a few rockets. This is our mobile launch platform Sputnik in 2013, when we were launching a rocket called Sapphire. And this particular rocket went up to about about 10 kilometers, and it was not supposed to go into space. The only reason why we launched this rocket is because we needed to test a guidance system, because that is one of the main challenges of going to space, is to have a guidance system that works. And we are actually building the guidance system on the same technology that you use in drones. It's a little bit more calibrated, a little bit better, but the gyros, the computers, is pretty much the same. I mean, what controls this rocket is the same kind of computer chip that you would find in a coffee machine. That's all that's needed. You need to measure the angles and the roll and the pitch, and you need to do that about 20 or 30 times a second, and then you need to correct the guidance of the rocket, and that's it. How we do that is kind of difficult. Again, in theory, this is very simple. To make it work in practice, it's not so simple. It's like balancing. Have you ever tried that? To balance a rocket? Balance a pen on your finger. It's the same concept. When you balance a pen on your finger, only a rocket is a pen going 3.5 times the speed of sound, and you need to balance it while it's flying. But the concept is the same. Once the pencil wants to fall a little bit to one side, then you steer the rear end of it to the other side, so it corrects itself. In this rocket, we do it by small vanes that are sitting in the exhaust of the engine that pushes one way or another. When we are building the big rocket, we will probably use a technology called gimbaling, which means that you are actually putting the engine in a ball bearing, and then the engine itself will swing a little bit back and forth, because that's more efficient and actually also easier to make at a large scale. This image here shows the inside of a rocket called Heat 2X that we tested last year. This was actually supposed to be the first rocket we built that were going to pass the Kármán line. It's not as big as the Spica. It's about 65 centimeters in diameter, but it was capable of going above the Kármán line had it worked. Why I am showing this is because you can see when you look at it, this look very space-like, but when you break it down and look at the materials we use, the installation of the cables is actually heat blankets that you use for rescue. Between heat blankets, we have rolled some of the fabric that you normally use to make ballerina skirts for little girls. Works fine. All the valves and engines are standard industrial components that would be used in a processing plant of some sort. And the cables that you can see there are actually the front braking cables from a Fiat Ducato. But it worked. But I will show you when you are in space flight some of the challenges you sometimes face.
2, 6, 5, 4.
This was a pretty sad day. I was standing about 100 meters from this rocket. What happens is that the engine ignites and fires as it should. It pushes with about 6.5 tons. And then when it goes into main stage, as we call it, there, you can see the engine ruptures and all the fuel is actually coming out in about 2 seconds. So 600 liters of alcohol is burning in 2 seconds with pure oxygen. The camera that is filming this is a GoPro that was strapped with the cable ties about 1 meter from the engine. And now the cable ties melted. And the camera falls down into the water pit. And then it'll just stay down there with the face up. But we actually got a few cameras from GoPro from this, because the GoPro camera actually survived. Well, if you want something rugged, you should buy the GoPros. Well, survived is probably a big word, because you the data survived. The camera is pretty much useless. But that was a good day. And here you can see our arsenal. The Spiker is out here. The Heat 2X that you saw on the video is here. And this summer we are launching 2 small rockets to test more of the technology. Obviously, what we did last summer wasn't really good enough, so we need to step a little bit back. So we have decided we are taking it down and building something a little bit smaller to get a hold of some of the concepts that are not so good enough. So this summer, actually in 3 weeks, we will be launching the Nexø rockets. The Nexø rockets are 2 small rockets, but it is exactly the same technology as the Spiker will be. It is liquid fueled. It's a very, very stable engine that we have tested over 30 times. And this rocket will go up to about 12 kilometers, and we'll do what we call an all-up test to test all the subsystems, because the radios, the computers, the control of everything is exactly the same as they will be on the Spiker rocket. This is just much easier and much cheaper to actually make. We have also a parachute that we have tested numerous times this summer. We have 2 guys sewing our own parachutes. And this is also a very vital part of the experiment. As I said before, we haven't been so lucky with the parachutes in the past. But this is actually this is the parachute that would fly on the rocket that we are testing with a man. If I had the time, I would show you a little anecdote, but maybe we can do that afterwards about the parachutes. I will just briefly show you a small video of the engine that we have tested this spring that will fly on the rocket. This particular test was to see if graphite or copper was the best material for the jet vanes. As you can see, it's the copper at the bottom. You can see copper was not a good idea, but graphite was fantastic, actually. And here you can see small. Isn't it beautiful to see that little? It's not much bigger than an ordinary thermo bottle. But look at that, and it's pushing with 500 kilos. It's fantastic. So the view won't be as magnificent this time. We will have a camera aboard, and we will do a live stream of the entire mission, and you can go to our website and we'll watch it. Of course, we will announce everything, but you can follow us live, and we'll broadcast everything live. Also, live video from the rocket as it ascends, and hopefully we will see not this, but something like it. And if this works as it should, then we will move on and build the big rocket and hopefully launch it in 2017 and go to space, mostly because it's there.
Thank you.